It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was finishing a project at work when my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. 3 short sentences that ended 30 years of being her daughter. She said not to call or come over anymore. That the family had decided. What would you do if your own mother decided you no longer belonged to the family? I kept reading those lines until the words blurred. My hands were trembling, but my eyes stayed dry. I didn't cry. I couldn't. It was as if the tears had been used up years ago, drop by drop. Every time she made me feel like I wasn't enough, and I believed her. The message wasn't long, but it was enough to erase everything I thought I knew about family. If you've ever given your all and still been left out, comment 1. Because sometimes, being the good one doesn't save you, it only teaches them how to hurt you quietly. I tried to replay the last few weeks, searching for something that could explain it. The last time we spoke, she had called me crying about the electricity being shut off. I'd transferred $2,000 before she finished the sentence. That was just what I did. The responsible daughter, the fixer, the one who never said no. I told myself, that's what love looked like, giving until it hurt. And it did hurt. Every month when I skipped buying groceries so I could help with her bills. Every holiday when I showed up alone, pretending not to notice that my sister, Tessa, always got the better seat, the warmer smile, the softer tone. I convinced myself that it was fine, that being loved differently didn't mean being unloved. But when my phone lit up that afternoon, the truth came in a flood. The text came at 2:47 p.m. I still remember the number because I took a screenshot without thinking. Maybe I wanted proof that it had really happened. That my mother, the woman who used to call me her rock, could write something so final. She didn't even add my name, just those words. Cold, sharp, like a knife wrapped in politeness. I thought about calling her. I almost did. My finger hovered over her contact, the same photo that had been there for years, her at the beach, laughing, sunglasses tilted. She looked like someone who loved life, who loved her children. But that woman didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never did. I typed a response. Something long, messy, begging her to explain. Then I deleted it. Instead, I wrote 2 words. Got it. I hit send, before I could change my mind. When the message sent, it felt like the air left the room. My chest was heavy, but there was also a strange lightness, a quiet I hadn't felt in years. I sat there for a long time, watching the blue bubble on the screen, waiting for the 3 dots to appear. They never did. At 5:15, my boss came by my desk. He must have seen something in my face, because he told me to go home early. I nodded, pretending I was fine. On the drive home, everything looked too normal, people walking dogs, lights changing, the world still turning while mine had stopped. By the time I reached my apartment, the sky had turned orange. I poured myself a cup of coffee I didn't need and sat on the couch, scrolling through Tessa's social media. The newest post stopped me cold. It was a photo from my mother's living room, the same one with the floral wallpaper and the old piano I used to practice on as a kid. There they were, my mother, Tessa, Aunt Carol, Uncle Dean, all smiling, glasses raised. The caption read, "Family is everything when you cut out the toxic energy." Toxic energy. That was me. I stared at that picture until my phone dimmed. Then I turned it face down and just sat there in the quiet. I wanted to feel anger, but all I felt was confusion. When had I become the villain in their story? Later that night, I drove to my mother's house. I told myself I just needed to understand. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe she'd hug me, apologize, tell me she didn't mean it. But when I turned the corner and saw the lights glowing through the curtains, the laughter spilling out, I knew better. Her car was parked outside. So was Tessa's new BMW, the one she bought after her modeling trip to Greece. I sat in my car, engine off, watching silhouettes move inside. My family, my own flesh and blood together, happy, pretending I didn't exist. I was about to leave when my phone buzzed again. A new post, Tessa, again. Another photo, same room, different angle. Everyone smiling wider this time. My mother had her arm around Tessa, the same way she used to hold me when I was little. The caption read, "So blessed to have a complete family." Complete. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. My voice stayed trapped somewhere deep in my chest. All I could think about was that word complete. When had I become incomplete? I drove home slowly, the kind of slow where you don't want to arrive because you don't want to face the silence waiting inside. Every red light felt like a punishment. Every familiar street like a reminder of what I'd lost. When I finally got home, I sat on the floor, the phone still in my hand. I opened the text again, reading it over and over, until the words stopped meaning anything. Don't call or come over anymore. We're done. The family has decided. The family. As if it was a council. As if love could be voted on. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of rain against the window. Around midnight, I remembered something my grandmother used to say. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. For years, I refused to believe what my mother had been showing me, that her love always had terms, and I was running out of ways to meet them. That night, for the first time, I started to believe her. I didn't know then that this message was only the beginning, that behind those 3 sentences was a secret big enough to shatter everything I thought I understood about loyalty, blood, and family. I just knew one thing. The next time my mother said we're done, she was finally telling the truth. The next morning felt heavier than the night before, the kind of heaviness that sits on your chest and makes every breath sound louder than it should. I got out of bed because I didn't know what else to do. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. The air smelled like stale coffee and regret. I poured another cup anyway, just to hold something warm. When I looked at my phone, there were no missed calls, no messages, not even a read receipt from my mother. It was like I had been erased overnight. I checked my contacts again to be sure she hadn't blocked me. She hadn't. She just didn't care enough to reply. That realization hit harder than the text itself. I scrolled through social media, half out of habit, half out of pain. My thumb stopped on a photo that froze me in place. My mother's living room again. The same floral wallpaper, the same glow of yellow light that used to mean comfort. There they were, all of them, smiling around the dinner table. My aunt, my uncle, my sister Tessa, holding a glass of wine like she had earned it. And my mother at the center, her eyes soft, her hand resting on Tessa's shoulder. The caption read, "Family night again, feeling complete." Complete. That word came back to me like a slap. I had been the one who sent the money that probably paid for that dinner. The electricity bill I covered. The groceries she said she couldn't afford. The money she cried for on the phone. I had paid for the food on their table, for the wine in their glasses, for the lights above their smiling faces. I had been funding my own erasure. I set the phone down and stared at the wall. There was a ringing in my ears that wouldn't stop. It wasn't anger yet. Anger is loud and alive. This was something quieter, heavier. Disbelief. That dull, empty ache that follows you everywhere. I opened my banking app, scrolling through the transactions I knew by heart. 2,000 here, 1,200 there, another 500 for a supposed plumbing emergency. Every month, like clockwork, money leaving my account and disappearing into theirs. I told myself I was being a good daughter, that one day they would see all the sacrifices I made. But now it was clear. They had seen them all along. They just never cared. At work that day, I barely spoke. My coworkers noticed. One of them, Sarah, left a cup of tea on my desk without saying a word. I wanted to thank her, but my voice refused to come out. Instead, I stared at the steam rising from the cup, thinking how kindness from a stranger felt warmer than love from my own family. After work, I drove past my mother's house again. It wasn't planned. My car just seemed to know the way. I slowed down when I reached the corner. The windows were glowing again. Shadows moved behind the curtains. Laughter drifted faintly through the night air. They were together. I was outside. It was as simple and cruel as that. I stayed there longer than I should have, watching through the rain-streaked windshield. At one point, I thought I saw my mother glance toward the window, as if she felt someone watching. But she turned away quickly, back toward the table, back toward the life she'd chosen. Something broke quietly inside me, not with noise or tears, but with the kind of stillness that feels final. When I got home, I sat at my desk and opened old photos. Birthdays, graduations, holidays. I searched each one for signs I had missed. The way her smile never reached her eyes when I was in the frame. The subtle shift of her body leaning closer to Tessa. The small, almost invisible moments where I was there, but not really part of it. I started to remember all the little lies that had never made sense. The calls she couldn't answer because she was at church, but there was no record of a service. The months she claimed to be sick but still managed to post family photos online. I had ignored every sign because it was easier to believe she loved me than to accept she didn't. That night I couldn't eat. I tried to read, but the words blurred. I turned on the TV just for background noise, but even the voices there sounded distant. The walls of my apartment felt closer somehow, like the air was shrinking. I kept waiting for the loneliness to ease, but it only grew heavier. Around midnight, I went to the mirror and looked at myself. My face was pale, my eyes empty. I barely recognized the person staring back. For years, I had defined myself by what I gave. My time, my energy, my money, my love. But what happens when the giving stops? When there is no one left to receive it? I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, and whispered to the dark room. Why wasn't I enough? The question hung there, unanswered. Maybe it always would be. Days turned into weeks. My mother didn't reach out, neither did Tessa. The silence became its own kind of companion, cruel but predictable. I started to move differently. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes. I stopped looking at their posts, but the ache didn't fade. It just settled deeper, like roots growing in places I couldn't reach. One Sunday morning, I walked past a park where families were having picnics. Parents laughing, children running, the smell of food and summer in the air. It made my chest tighten. I used to imagine a family like that for myself. A family that cared, that showed up, that didn't throw people away when they stopped being useful. But as I stood there watching, I realized something I hadn't before. Maybe I had been chasing something that never really existed. Maybe my idea of family had been nothing more than a story I told myself to survive. When I got home, I opened my mother's message one last time. I read it slowly, not as a daughter this time, but as an outsider looking at evidence. The coldness in her words was almost impressive. She hadn't said she was angry. She hadn't said she needed space. She had said we're done. The finality of it was deliberate. I deleted the message, not out of forgiveness, but because I finally understood that I didn't need to keep it. The proof of her rejection wasn't in my phone. It was in the empty chair at every dinner I'd paid for. It was in the silence that followed every act of love I gave her. That was the night I stopped being her daughter in my heart, even before the truth came out. I just didn't know yet how deep her betrayal really went, or how much more she had taken from me than just love. A month passed before I could even say her name out loud again. My mother. It felt strange, like a word that no longer fit in my mouth. I had started to live on autopilot work, sleep, repeat just enough to keep people from asking questions. But inside, everything felt hollow, like a house after the furniture has been moved out. Then, one afternoon, while clearing old emails, I stumbled on a message from my grandmother's lawyer, Mr. Peterson. It was dated almost 3 weeks earlier. I almost deleted it, thinking it was a mistake. But something about the subject line made me stop. Regarding your grandmother's estate. My grandmother, Rose. She had been gone for 2 months. My mother had called me about her death in the most casual tone imaginable, as if she were discussing the weather. There had been no funeral invitation, no chance to say goodbye. She had told me, "It's just family only, Delilah. You understand." At the time, I told myself she was grieving. I didn't question it. I should have. I opened the email. Mr. Peterson's words were short but polite. He said he had been trying to reach me about certain inconsistencies involving my grandmother's will, that he needed to speak with me as soon as possible. My stomach twisted. I didn't even know there was a will. I called him immediately. The phone barely rang before he answered. His voice was calm, but careful, like someone trying not to alarm me. "Delilah, I'm glad you reached out. I've been expecting your call." He explained that he had handled my grandmother's affairs for nearly 40 years, and that something about the new will filed by my mother and sister didn't feel right. "New will?" I asked, frowning. "Yes," he said. a revised version dated 6 months ago, leaving everything to your mother and sister. But here's the thing. Your grandmother's medical records from that time show she couldn't write her name, let alone sign legal documents. And yet, the signature on this one is flawless. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the phone harder. He continued. The original will, from 3 years ago, left her entire estate to you, Delilah. The house, her savings, her jewelry, everything. I didn't say anything. My throat felt like it had closed up. I could hear my own heartbeat through the silence. Are you sure? I whispered. Quite sure, he said gently. Your grandmother was clear about her wishes. She even left a handwritten note explaining them. My eyes filled before I even realized it. Grandma Rose had always been the only one who saw me. When I visited her at the nursing home, even as her memory faded, she always smiled. She would squeeze my hand and say, "You're the one who shows up, my sweet girl." I thought she had forgotten most things, but apparently she hadn't forgotten me. Mr. Peterson asked if I could meet him the next morning. I said yes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every visit I'd had with Grandma Rose, every phone call where my mother said she was too tired to go see her. I remembered the times I arrived at the nursing home and found flowers from Tessa, but no Tessa. The staff used to tell me she only came by for photos. At the time, it felt cruel to think that way. Now, it felt like truth. When I met Mr. Peterson the next day, he greeted me with a weary smile. His office smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. On the desk lay 2 folders. One thick, one thin. This is the original will, he said, tapping the thinner one. Signed 3 years ago, when your grandmother was still of sound mind. And this is the new one. He slid the thicker folder toward me. I opened it slowly. The first page looked ordinary legal text, witness lines, formalities. But then I saw it. My grandmother's name. Written perfectly, not a single tremor, every letter smooth and confident. I remembered her last few years vividly. Her hands had trembled, even when she tried to hold a cup. She hadn't been able to sign her own birthday cards. I still had one from that year, her name barely a shaky line, drawn with help from a nurse. Yet here, 6 months later, it looked like a flawless signature. How did they get this past the notary? I asked quietly. Mr. Peterson's mouth tightened. The notary in question was a friend of your mother's boyfriend. Miles, I believe. I nodded slowly. The room went colder. There's more, he added. The nursing home director raised concerns about multiple visits your mother made around that time, always during your grandmother's medication hours, always involving paperwork. My pulse quickened. So you think they... I think, he interrupted softly, that someone forged your grandmother's signature and submitted a fraudulent will. And I think you, Miss Delilah, are the rightful heir. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. All the air seemed to leave the room. My mother hadn't just cut me out of her life. She had stolen my grandmother's last act of love and rewritten it for herself. As I left the office, I felt a strange mix of rage and disbelief. The city looked the same, but nothing felt familiar. The streets, the faces, even the sky, all seemed colder. That night, I sat with the old photo albums Grandma Rose had given me. Between the pages of one, I found a note I'd never noticed before, folded small, tucked behind a picture of her garden. In her shaky handwriting, it said, "For my Delilah, who sees people for who they are, not what they can give her." I held the note for a long time, reading the words again and again. It felt like she was speaking to me from somewhere beyond the noise. I didn't know what to do yet, but I knew I couldn't stay quiet. If my mother and Tessa had faked that will, I would find proof. The next day, I went through my laptop, the one my mother had borrowed a few months earlier. I found something I'd forgotten. She had logged into her Facebook account and never logged out. I hesitated before clicking. My hands were shaking again, but curiosity overpowered fear. The message history opened, and my heart stopped. There it was, a conversation between my mother and Tessa, dated right before Grandma Rose's death. Tessa had written, "The nursing home is getting suspicious about the signatures," and my mother replied, "Don't worry. Miles knows people who can backdate the documents. Delilah doesn't need to know about the changes." I stared at the screen, my stomach turning. There was no room for doubt anymore. They had done it. That night, I printed every message, every photo, every post, every screenshot. I laid them out on the kitchen table, like pieces of a puzzle. And when I saw them all together, something inside me shifted. The sadness that had filled me for weeks began to drain away, replaced by something sharper, colder. They thought I was done. They thought I would disappear quietly. But they were wrong. For the first time since the message that ended 30 years of being her daughter, I finally felt awake. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying the messages I had found, my mother's words, the casual cruelty of them, the certainty that I wouldn't find out. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her name on that fake will, her perfect handwriting forged over my grandmother's fading memory. By morning, something inside me had hardened, the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from decision. If they thought I would accept this, they didn't know me at all. The next day, I called Mr. Peterson. My voice was steadier than I felt. "I want to prove it," I said, "not just for the money, but for her, for Grandma Rose." He was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "If you're serious, you'll need evidence, real evidence, and it won't be easy. Your mother's had months to cover her tracks." That was fine. I'd spent my whole life cleaning up her messes. I knew how she operated. She didn't erase things, she hid them in plain sight. I started at the nursing home. Patricia, one of the nurses, remembered me immediately. Her face softened when I mentioned Grandma Rose. "You were the one who always brought her the lavender lotion," she said. "She used to tell us you had the kindest hands." Her kindness almost broke me, but I held it together long enough to ask what I really came for. "Patricia, did you ever see my mother bring papers for her to sign around 6 months ago?" She looked down, her voice lowering. "Yes, more than once, always during medication hours, and your grandmother was, well, not herself those days, sleepy, confused. They said it was just business, but it didn't feel right. I asked if there were cameras. She hesitated, then nodded. We have security footage, but management deleted most of it when the system was updated." I felt my stomach sink, but then she added, "Not all of it. I saved a copy. I didn't know what was going on back then, but something told me to keep it." The next day, she met me at a small coffee shop near the hospital. Her hands trembled as she handed me a flash drive. "Be careful," she whispered. "People like your mother, they don't stop when you find the truth. They just find new ways to bury it." When I got home, I plugged it into my laptop. The file opened to grainy black and white footage, time-stamped from 6 months earlier. I watched my mother and Tessa walk into Grandma's room, laughing quietly. My grandmother was asleep, her hand resting limply on the blanket. Then Miles entered, carrying a stack of papers. The three of them stood around the bed. My mother placed a pen between my grandmother's fingers. Miles held her wrist, moving her hand slowly across the page. Tessa stood at the door, watching. I couldn't breathe. My throat burned as I pressed pause, then play again, just to be sure of what I was seeing. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't exaggeration. It was proof. They had used her hand like she was a puppet. I sent a copy to Mr. Peterson that night. He called me within minutes. "This changes everything," he said, "but we'll need to authenticate it. The police will need to see it too." He put me in touch with Detective Morrison from the Elder Fraud Division, a calm man with eyes that missed nothing. He listened carefully as I told him everything, from the text that started it all to the footage Patricia had given me. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said, "If what you're saying checks out, this is serious. Forgery, elder abuse, fraud. But we'll need more than just video. We'll need the documents themselves." That meant going back to my mother's house. The thought made my stomach twist, but I knew where to look. She had always kept her important papers in the same drawer, the one in her office desk, under the framed picture of all of us smiling at some long-forgotten Christmas. I waited until Sunday morning, when I knew she and Tessa would be at church. The key was still under the fake rock by the porch. She'd shown it to me years ago, back when trust still existed between us. The house smelled the same lemon cleaner and the faint trace of her perfume. For a moment, it almost fooled me into feeling safe again. But then I saw the family photo on the wall. Someone had cut the frame smaller. My face was gone. In her office, the drawer was locked. I used a bobby pin to open it. my hands steady despite the adrenaline running through me. Inside was a stack of envelopes labeled estate planning. I pulled them out, heart pounding. Inside were drafts of the will, some with my name still on them, some with it crossed out, notes in the margins, too obvious, make it cleaner, practice signature again. At the bottom of the drawer was a folder marked Simply Practice Sheets. My hands shook as I flipped through page after page of my grandmother's name written over and over, each one smoother than the last. The handwriting was my mother's. When I turned the last page, something else fell out, a small folded paper. A note written in my grandmother's shaky hand. If you're reading this, Delilah, it means you found what they did. Don't let them take what's yours. I love you, my girl. I pressed the note to my chest. It smelled faintly of lavender. I took everything, the drafts, the practice sheets, the note, and left the house without looking back. I dropped the key under the fake rock exactly where I'd found it. Back home, I spread the evidence across my kitchen table. The documents, the screenshots, the video stills. It looked like a crime scene, not of violence, but of betrayal. I met Detective Morrison again the next morning. When he saw the papers, he nodded grimly. This is enough to open an investigation. The following weeks were a blur of statements, signatures, and interviews. Patricia's testimony matched the timeline perfectly. The handwriting expert confirmed the forgery. Even the nursing home's deleted files were partially recovered, showing suspicious logins from my mother's email. Each new piece of proof felt like another fracture in the image of the woman I'd spent my life trying to love. She hadn't just lied to me. She had stolen from the only person who had ever truly loved either of us. One evening, after the detective left, I sat by the window with Grandma's note in my hand. Outside, the city hummed like nothing had changed, but for me, everything had. I realized I wasn't broken anymore. I was angry, controlled, quiet anger, the kind that doesn't scream but plans. My mother thought she had erased me. But now I had the truth. And the truth was sharper than anything she'd ever used to cut me out of her life. The morning of the will reading arrived gray and silent, the kind of morning that felt like it was holding its breath. I hadn't slept. I'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, going over every possible outcome, every word I might say, every lie my mother might tell. My body was exhausted, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. The detective had already arranged everything. Patricia, the nurse, would attend to confirm the footage. Dr. Chen, a handwriting expert, would present her findings on the forged signatures. Mr. Wanarating to aid her. Peterson would oversee the proceedings. I didn't tell my mother I was coming. I wanted her to think she'd won. By 9:30, I was parked outside the law office, watching through the window as the three of them arrived, my mother, Tessa, and Miles. They were laughing. My mother wore Grandma's pearl necklace. The one she'd promised was being kept in a safety box until the will was settled. Tessa had Grandma's old Chanel bag hanging from her arm like a trophy. And Miles, in a tailored suit, looked like he was already spending the inheritance in his head. I waited until the clock struck 10 before walking in. The air inside was cold, heavy with tension and perfume. My mother froze when she saw me. "Delilah," she said, forcing a smile. "You must be confused, sweetheart. This is a private family matter." I looked straight at her. "Good thing I'm family then." Her smile faltered. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat, signaling for everyone to sit. The will reading began quietly. He started with the most recent version, the fake one, the one leaving everything to my mother and Tessa. I watched them both lean back, confident, smug, not realizing what was coming. When he finished, my mother reached over and patted my hand. "Don't worry, honey," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We'll make sure you get something. Maybe one of Grandma's old cookbooks." I didn't move. "Actually," I said, "I already brought something of my own." Her brow furrowed as I stood and nodded to Detective Morrison, who had been sitting quietly in the corner. He stepped forward and placed a thick folder on the table. "Mrs. Harris," he said, addressing my mother, "we have some questions about this will." The room went still. He opened the folder and pulled out photos of the practice sheets, my mother's handwriting, page after page of Grandma's name. Then he laid out copies of the nursing home's visitation records, showing that my mother and Tessa were present on the same day, The so-called new will had been signed. My mother's voice cracked first. "This is ridiculous. Those aren't mine." Then Patricia stood up, her hands steady for the first time since I'd met her. "I was there," she said quietly. "I saw what you did. You brought those papers when your mother was unconscious. You held her hand while your boyfriend guided the pen." The color drained from my mother's face. Miles shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. I took a deep breath and turned toward Dr. Chen, who stepped forward with a small stack of papers. "The signature on the newer will does not match any verified examples of Rose Harris's handwriting from the last 5 years," she said. "The pen pressure, letter formation, and stroke consistency are incompatible with her known Parkinson's symptoms." And then came the final blow. Patricia connected her phone to the large screen on the wall. The room filled with the grainy nursing home footage. My mother and Tessa appeared on the screen, standing over Grandma Rose's bed. My grandmother's hand moved across the paper, limp and lifeless, guided by Miles as my mother whispered something to him. Tessa stood by the door, checking the hallway. For a long moment, nobody said a word. Then my mother lunged forward, trying to snatch the phone. "Mr." Peterson caught her wrist before she could reach it. Miles stood up, pale and sweating. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered. Detective Morrison stepped forward. "Actually, it's exactly what it looks like. Forgery, elder fraud, conspiracy. You're all under investigation." The silence that followed felt like the world had stopped moving. My mother sank into her chair, trembling. Tessa started crying, insisting she didn't know what was happening, that she was only trying to help. Miles swore under his breath and tried to leave, but 2 uniformed officers were already waiting in the hallway. As they read my mother her rights, she looked at me. Her eyes were wide, not with guilt, but disbelief that I had beaten her at her own game. "How could you do this to your family?" she hissed. I didn't answer. Because in that moment, I realized something profound. I hadn't destroyed my family. They had destroyed themselves, long before I ever found the proof. When they were let out, my mother kept talking, still trying to rewrite the story even as the truth sat in front of her. "She's lying," she shouted to anyone who would listen. "She's always been jealous. She doesn't understand what we've been through." Tessa followed behind, still crying, still pretending. Miles stayed silent, his face hardening with each step. When the door closed behind them, I finally exhaled. My hands were shaking. I didn't feel victorious. Not really. What I felt was emptiness, the quiet that comes after a storm, when you realize there's nothing left standing. Mr. Peterson walked over and placed a small envelope in front of me. "This is your grandmother's original note," he said softly. "She wanted you to have it after the will was read." Inside was a single page, written in her familiar shaky hand. "Family isn't who shares your blood, Delilah. It's who shows up, who stays, and who loves you when there's nothing to gain." I read it 3 times, each word carving a space inside me that had been hollow for years. As I left the office, the sky had cleared. The air smelled of rain and new beginnings. But even as I walked to my car, the weight of it all stayed with me, the years of manipulation, the lies, the guilt. I knew it wasn't over. My mother wouldn't go quietly. People like her never do. They rewrite, they twist, they reach out from the wreckage trying to pull you back in. But this time, I had something stronger than fear. I had proof, I had truth, and I had my grandmother's words echoing in my mind. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. And for once, I was showing up for myself. 6 months had passed since the day they were taken away in handcuffs. Sometimes it felt like a dream I had watched instead of lived. The house was quiet, quiet at first, almost painfully so, but over time, the silence began to sound like peace. I still woke up early, the way I used to when my mother might call crying about a new bill, a broken pipe, or some emergency that never really existed. The first few weeks, my hand would instinctively reach for the phone, but there were no calls, no messages, no new demands. Just quiet mornings, sunlight pouring through the curtains of the house Grandma Rose had left to me. Her house was my home now. I hadn't changed much about it. The floral wallpaper still lined the hallway, and the clock above the kitchen door still ticked a little too loudly. I left it that way because it felt like she was still here, still watching over me. Sometimes I would catch the faint scent of lavender, the same lotion I used to bring her. I'd smile, thinking maybe the house remembered her too. After the court hearings, the media called it the Harris family fraud case. I hated that title. It sounded like entertainment. But it was real, painfully real. My mother was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for forgery and elder abuse. Tessa received 3 years in probation afterward. Miles, ever the coward, tried to run to Mexico, but he was caught at the border and given 7 years. The nursing home director lost his license and faced charges of his own. Patricia, the nurse who had risked her job to tell the truth, was promoted to director of a new facility. When she told me about it, she said softly, "Your grandmother's story changed the rules, Delilah. We're making sure it doesn't happen again." I used the settlement money from the case to create something I knew Grandma Rose would have loved, a foundation in her name to protect elderly people from financial abuse. Patricia joined the board, along with Miss Peterson and Detective Morrison. We called it the Rose Foundation for Trust and Dignity. Every time a new case came in, every time we helped someone recognize the signs of manipulation before it was too late, I felt like Grandma was smiling somewhere. The house became more than just a home. It became a place of restoration. I opened the garden again, the one Grandma had cared for until her hands could no longer hold the shovel. The first time I planted new roses, I found small notes hidden under the soil near the porch, messages she must have written long before she lost her memory. One read, "If life ever feels too heavy, plant something new. Love grows where pain used to live." I kept that one pinned to my desk. People often asked me if I felt satisfied with what happened, if I felt justice was enough. The truth is, justice doesn't heal you. It just stops the bleeding long enough for you to start stitching yourself back together. Some nights I still heard her voice, my mother's, telling me I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too ungrateful. The words echoed not as memories but as scars that hadn't fully faded. About a month after the sentencing, I received her first letter from prison. 8 pages. It was everything I expected: manipulation disguised as forgiveness. She wrote that I had misunderstood everything, that she had been protecting Grandma's estate from greedy relatives, that she only forged the will to keep it in the family. She ended it with, "Despite what you've done, I forgive you. A mother's love never dies." I didn't write back. But I didn't tear the letter up either. I put it in a box, sealed it, and left it in the attic where it couldn't reach me. Over the next few months, more letters came. 17 in total. I returned each one unopened, marked "no longer at this address," because in a way, it was true. The version of me who used to wait for her approval no longer lived here. When autumn came, I held a small gathering at the house. The family that had once turned its back on me now stood awkwardly in the living room, unsure how to begin again. Aunt Helen was there too, one who had told me about my mother's past. She hugged me tight and whispered, "You broke the curse, Delilah. That kind of deceit runs in blood until someone decides to stop it." After everyone left, I walked through the garden as the sun went down. The roses glowed softly in the fading light, their petals brushing against my hands. I thought about Grandma's words about love, about showing up when there's nothing to gain. In her will, she hadn't just left me the house. She'd left a handwritten note tucked in the last page of her journal, found months after the trial ended. It said, "My darling Delilah, you have the heart I always hoped this family would have. This home, this garden, and everything in it, it's not your inheritance, it's your beginning. Build something better with it. Make it bloom again." That night, I sat by the window, the same spot where she used to knit in the evenings. The moonlight poured across the floorboards, catching the edges of her old photo frames. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small or unwanted. I felt rooted, like everything I had lost had somehow led me right here. I finally understood that the real inheritance wasn't the property or the money. It was the peace she'd wanted me to find. It was the courage to walk away from the people who used love as a weapon. It was knowing that blood might connect us, but it doesn't define us. Choice does. Before I went to bed, I wrote my own letter, not to send, but to keep. I placed it in Grandma's journal, beside her note. It said simply, "You were right, Grandma. Love does grow again, even in the ruins. The family has decided, and this time, I'm part of the decision. Then I closed the book, turned off the light, and for the first time in years, I slept without dreams of the past. Outside, the wind moved softly through the roses, and it felt like she was still here quiet, watching, proud. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever loved too hard, forgiven too easily, or stayed longer than you should have, you're not alone. Here, we tell stories for people who feel deeply, for those who've been silenced, betrayed, or simply forgotten. So before you scroll away, hit subscribe and stay with me, because every week there's another story waiting, and maybe one of them will sound a little like yours.